My name is Eric Marshall. I'm the Executive Director of PDG, the Partnership for DSCSA Governance. PDG is a collaborative forum and FDA public-private partnership committed to implementing the DSCSA Drug Supply Chain Security Act of 2013. What that means in practical terms is it's the point where industry can come together with solution providers to decide and define what solutions are needed to achieve interoperability for 2023. And it's also the point where industry can come together with regulators to talk about expectations for 2023 as well. It's my pleasure to be joined today by Connie Jung from FDA's Center for Drug Evaluation and Research.
I'm Connie Jung. I'm Senior Advisor for Policy in the Office of Drug Security, Integrity, and Response. This is the main office in CDER's Office of Compliance that is working on implementing supply chain security requirements under the Drug Supply Chain Security Act, or DSCSA. We work on initiatives that protect the supply chain to ensure that we're minimizing the chance of exposure to harmful and dangerous drugs by U.S. consumers.
So the U.S. has one of the most secure pharmaceutical supply chains in the world. So how did we end up here? Why did Congress up the ante on supply chain security in the U.S.?
That's right. The U.S. does have one of the safest pharmaceutical supply chains in the world. We certainly do not see the same level of counterfeits or substandard products that other areas or other countries see globally. But that doesn't mean we should be complacent. We need to be vigilant to make sure that we are keeping bad products out of the supply chain, and of course, at the same time, protecting those products that are good or safe and authentic. So what DSCSA requirements does is it puts requirements in place for transactional documentation from the point of manufacture as that drug is distributed to the pharmacies. So from manufacturer, wholesale distributor to pharmacies. And what that means is U.S. consumers can be confident that what products they are receiving at their pharmacies is high quality and authentic product.
As you said, they are rare instances, but I think from an industry perspective, it's good to remind folks as well, they do happen, right? This law and some of the state activity that drove it came on the heels of the Avastin outbreak and some other similar circumstances. I think it's good to remind folks that this was a response to some state activity as well. In the 2000s, we saw a number of states implementing similar types of requirements that varied state by state pedigree type of requirements, as they were often called. And in many ways, the DSCSA was a response to that from industry as well, to drive towards one single uniform national standard, because I think industry recognized how difficult it was going to be to manage DSCSA traceability type activities on a 50-state basis. And so going into the conversation, I think it's good to remind folks as well that this is a law that industry asked for and was very supportive of because they favored that single national standard in that way.
That's right. And DSCSA puts in requirements for the supply chain, but also FDA to meet our shared goal, which is protecting patients from receiving illegitimate product. So it allows us to be able to prevent the introduction of harmful products into the drug supply chain, but also respond in a way that we can make sure that those products don't reach patients.
So the DSCSA, Drug Supply Chain Security Act of 2013, a lot in it and a lot of requirements, a very comprehensive, holistic approach to supply chain security. What does the law require?
So there are several components and provisions of the law, and they're phased in over a 10-year period. But in a nutshell, there are 4 key requirements. The first one being related to product tracing, and this has to do with the documentation with each transaction. So a seller needs to provide that documentation to the buyer, and the buyer needs to hold on to that information for record-keeping purposes for a period of 6 years. There's also verification requirements, and this is a lot bundled into that. This includes steps that need to be taken when you identify a product that is suspect, and how you need to investigate that product and properly quarantine that product. Once you investigate it and determine that it's okay, then it may be distributed if that's the case. However, if you determine that there's credible evidence that that product is truly illegitimate product, which means that it's confirmed counterfeit, stolen, diverted product, potentially adulterated product, then there are additional steps when you have identified and determined illegitimate product. Those also include investigating that coordinating with your other trading partners, and also notifying them that you've actually found illegitimate product. And again, the main reason for that is to the notification and the coordination is to ensure that we are finding all the illegitimate product that may be out there and making sure that it's not further distributed. So again, trying to make sure those products are not reaching U.S. consumers. The other requirements include the product identifier requirements. And these are, while it's mostly on manufacturers and repackagers who are producing the product, this has to do with putting a product identifier on the product in a human-readable and machine-readable format. And the importance of this identification is it gives that information or product information that can be used for sort of the other requirements, whether it's product tracing or verifying a product. You've got the National Drug Code or NDC that is specific to a product. And then even more specific and more unique is the serial number. The newness and the importance of that product identifier is that serial number that is unique to that product and that package. And then, of course, it includes lot level information and an expiration date. The last requirement is related to authorized trading partners, and this means that you as a trading partner need to be authorized. In addition to anybody that you are conducting business with also needs to be an authorized trading partner. So if you're a manufacturer packager, that means that you have the appropriate registration with FDA. If you're a wholesale distributor or a third-party logistic provider or 3PL, that means that you have appropriate federal or state licensing. And then if you're a dispenser, in particular a pharmacy, that means you have appropriate state licensure.
So sitting here in 2023, right, I think there's a lot of attention and focus on the data component, that first piece you talked about, the traceability, right? But I think it's a good reminder that this is a holistic law and a holistic set of requirements and approach to security that has a host of requirements with it. I also just note, and one piece you touched on there with verification, I'll just throw out that, that's a term that gets used a lot of different ways and can cause confusion in some conversations. I think sometimes we talk about verification of the product identifier, that narrow piece of confirming the serial number, and forget, to your point, right, that there is this broader verification requirement, that more holistic approach to identifying, detecting, responding to suspect products as well. So it's the Drug Supply Chain Security Act of 2013. We've been at this now for nine and a half years. And there's a lot of attention and energy going into the November 27, 2023 deadlines. We've been at this for so long. Why is 2023 such a big deal and such a big milestone for industry and regulators?
So we have implemented many provisions of the law. As you said, we are in the last year of the 10-year implementation. And what members of the supply chain and other stakeholders have to realize is there are requirements that went into effect as early as 2014, 2015. We had reporting requirements, we had product tracing requirements, and even and verification requirements and authorized trading partner. These requirements remain in effect. They and will continue even beyond November 2023. But what changes in November 2023 is that the requirement to maintain and provide information moves to a fully electronic state. So right now we've been able to implement lot level traceability. In November 2023, it becomes package level or unit level traceability. And when we think about the product identifier, which now has unique serial numbers within that as part of the data set of that transaction information and also on product, this now becomes part of that documentation for product tracing in 2023. In addition, steps for verification change a little bit too, because now the expectation is that you'll be verifying down to the unit or package level as well because of that product identifier.
At a practical level, in terms of what that means for industry and for implementation, I was thinking about two really big shifts that drives. One is just the volume and granularity of data. So as you mentioned, right, we're doing lot level today. We don't have perfect data, but somewhere in the ballpark of, several 100,000 lots or batches of product that we're tracing through the supply chain today. As we move towards unit level traceability in 2023, it's somewhere closer to 4.5 billion individual units that we're going to be tracing. And so that level of granularity and detail and just sheer volume of data, I think, is fairly unprecedented for the supply chain. The other is this shift away from sole focus on existing commercial partners to a broader supply chain interoperability perspective. Most of what's been done to date has been in that context of direct commercial relationship between two direct trading partners. And I think 2023 really drives us to a place where we need to have that interoperability among the supply chain. And what does that look like when you have a small mom and pop pharmacy that now has to be able to, in some way, interoperably interact with a large multinational manufacturer, and just the complexity of arranging that and providing that capacity and capability throughout the supply chain.
Right. We recognize that interoperability is a very complex concept, and hopefully we've been able to put out guidances and information and recommendations that provide flexibility because of the diverse supply chain and the diverse capabilities within the supply chain.
So what does the Act specifically require for dispensers or pharmacies, as we may more commonly know them?
So, like the other trading partners in the supply chain, dispensers also have to do product tracing, verification, authorized trading partner, and product identification. But I'll sort of highlight the differences. With product tracing, that means that pharmacies need to have systems and processes in place to be able to accept that transaction information when they purchase product. And they need to hold on to those records for a period of 6 years. With verification, if dispensers do find a legitimate product, then they will need to investigate and properly disposition that product as well. Oftentimes, they do have to work with other trading partners since they purchase the product from a wholesale distributor or manufacturer. But in general, they will need to ensure that they have a handle on whether they have any illegitimate product within their possession or not. Then the authorized trading partner requirement, they need to make sure that they have their appropriate state licensure. Now there are some other unique requirements related to dispensers, such as, when they buy product, they need to make sure that they're buying product that is has the product identifier on it. At this point, products in the supply chain and that are on the shelves that are within the scope of the law should have the product identifier on them. And if you have any questions, you can always contact the original manufacturer of the product or even your wholesale distributor to check to whether that should or should not be on the products that you have on your shelves.
We're talking about dispensers. That's an important term, and the entire law is kind of constructed around those various sectors: manufacturer, wholesaler, dispenser. Maybe just a couple of things to highlight and emphasize for people around that term. One, just because you think of yourself as a pharmacy and you traditionally operate as a pharmacy doesn't mean that you are always and only a pharmacy. For example, if you're selling pharmacy to pharmacy and selling it further down the supply chain or to another pharmacy down the street, outside of a couple of specific exemptions, like a specific patient need where you're trying to fill that, if you're doing that kind of pharmacy to pharmacy type of selling or borrowing and loaning type of activity, you're really acting in a wholesaler capacity and subject to those requirements that you would be subject to as a wholesaler. The pharmacy term also applies to healthcare practitioners generally who are authorized to dispense and prescribe medications, although I think it's important for them to note that there are significant carve-outs or exceptions in the statute. So those HCPs, healthcare practitioners, are really only subject to that requirement to only purchase serialized product that carries the product identifier, as you said, and to ensure that they're only purchasing from other authorized trading partners.
Right. If anybody is confused about what activities or roles or obligations that they have under the DSCSA, FDA has issued a guidance for industry for identifying trading partners under DSCSA, which will help understand what activities you perform, how those activities will put you in a certain trading partner category, and therefore those are the requirements that you need to follow. But not necessarily duplicate. So the law also recognizes that you may do different types of activities. Therefore, you may have multiple obligations under the law.
So as I talk to dispensers around the country, one of the comments or questions that I often hear is, well, that's DSCSA stuff. My wholesaler handles that for me. Is that fair?
Dispensers are obligated to follow the requirements under DSCSA. Now, the law does recognize that or allows for dispensers to enter in a written agreement with a third party. And the third party can be their wholesale distributor, or it could be another authorized trading partner. It could also be a non-trading partner, meaning there are solution providers out there that are capable and willing to also do this function for them. But if they do enter in such agreement, they need to keep a copy of that written agreement, but also understand that the dispenser is ultimately responsible for compliance with the law, not the third parties that they're dealing with.
So if I simplify that down, maybe it's really two separate questions, right? One, can your wholesaler manage and store your data for you? Yes, with a written agreement. Can your wholesaler manage your compliance for you? No, that's your obligation and your obligation alone. Your wholesaler can't verify product for you. They can't confirm the authenticity of a product. They can't check to make sure you're only buying with certain from certain authorized suppliers or manage other SOPs for you. One of the other questions I often hear as I talk to folks across industry, particularly some of those who are newer to the DSCSA space, is, do I really need to do this? How big of a deal is it? And I remind them often, right, this is a federal law with federal criminal penalties, and so they do need to take this seriously. You agree with that?
Right. To add to that, I mean, remember, the main goal of this is to protect the integrity of the supply chain, right? We want to make sure that U.S. patients do not receive illegitimate product.
And I think to build on that as organizations think about their approach to compliance and implementation too, is not getting hung up so much on those penalties and trying to check the box to avoid a penalty, as much as figuring out what is that intent and that goal. How do you put that into a process that's well controlled and risk-based, and actually implement and execute that through your business processes. So as you mentioned, one of the main requirements of the DSCSA is what the statute calls verification. In practical terms, that really means identifying, detecting suspect and illegitimate product and responding to it appropriately. I know it's an area you've put out as an agency a lot of very useful guidance as well. Just talk about the importance of suspect and illegitimate product investigations.
Suspect and illegitimate product investigations are one of the main ways that members of the supply chain, in addition to regulators, are going to be able to determine whether there is truly illegitimate product out there and to deal with them. So, as you mentioned, under verification, there's a lot of different pieces to these requirements. But when you have suspect product, and that means that the product that is potentially counterfeit, stolen, diverted, potentially adulterated, or subject of a fraudulent transaction, that triggers steps for quarantine and investigation of that suspect product. As you investigate that suspect product and you determine that there's credible evidence that the product is illegitimate, that then triggers additional steps. When you have illegitimate product, you need to also investigate it and properly disposition that product, in addition to coordinating and working with the manufacturer and other affected trading partners to ensure that everybody is looking to see if they have any illegitimate product and making sure that it doesn't get further distributed in the supply chain. One of the other key requirements when you have an illegitimate product is notification, and this is notifying FDA in addition to your immediate trading partners that may be affected or may have received that product. And this is a new requirement under DSCSA that allows everybody to respond appropriately and, of course, in a timely fashion. Right? We didn't have this requirement before. Now, at least, we should be communicating and notifying each other when those illegitimate products are found.
And from a PDG perspective, so much of our emphasis is on that cross-industry collaboration piece. And I'm not sure there's anywhere it's more important than in a suspect or illegitimate product investigation. So I think it's important for people to recognize these investigations are kind of cross-industry, working with your trading partners to determine what happened and is the product legitimate or illegitimate. The statute even goes so far as to require that your investigation be in coordination with the manufacturer. And so I think it's important for people to recognize the level of collaboration that's needed to do that investigation well.
And likely trading partners already have certain processes in place or had processes in place before DSCSA was enacted that were intended to handle products that now are defined as suspect or illegitimate product. So it may be a matter of updating those processes and procedures such that you can do a robust investigation under DSCSA.
Yeah, a couple of pieces there, right? One, the statute talks a lot about this being an enhancement of supply chain security, right? Not suggesting it's void or missing today, but how do we continue to enhance it and continue to protect the supply chain? And your point about systems and processes, that's a phrase that is in the DSCSA a lot, right? Which points to how this practically gets implemented through good procedures, good processes, and not just having them to check a box to sit on a shelf, but how do you actually develop good, robust SOPs, train on them, implement them, and execute them in practice?
Right. And FDA has several guidances out there that cover all these steps within verification. So I recommend that if you need more information, to look at all our guidances related to verification systems or identifying suspect or illegitimate product, and also the enhanced security requirements. And there's probably a few other guidances as well that will come out.
One of the other points of confusion that I often hear when I talk to pharmacies is this perception that because they're regulated by their state boards of pharmacy, they for some reason don't need to follow the DSCSA. But FDA and the state boards actually collaborate quite closely on enforcement of the DSCSA, right?
The DSCSA actually provides regulatory tools for both FDA and state authorities for improving and protecting the integrity of the drug supply chain. So the state boards of pharmacy are the primary authority for licensing and compliance of pharmacies and the practice of pharmacy. The DSCSA requirements for product tracing, verification, product identifier, and authorized trading partner are federal requirements. It basically puts in place safeguards at the federal level on the supply chain for ensuring that we have documentation, we have mechanisms to be able to verify product from manufacturer as it's distributed ultimately to pharmacies. But because we have these safeguards both at the federal and state level, it actually creates a closed system, right? In terms of who are the players in the supply chain. But we will continue to collaborate and work with state authorities as we need to, in particular when we're investigating suspect and illegitimate product.
So the U.S. pharmaceutical supply chain is incredibly diverse, and I think the law recognizes that by authorizing FDA to issue certain waivers, exceptions, and exemptions. Talk a little bit about the importance of waivers, exceptions, and exemptions.
Right. DSCSA gives FDA the authority to consider requests for specific waivers, exceptions, or exemptions, and those they're each a little bit different, and they're described within the law. But a trading partner or another entity can submit a request to the agency for a waiver, exception, or exemption. And we just issued a final guidance that explains in more detail the context on what information you need to submit with such request and how to submit it using FDA's CEDAR NextGen portal.
And I think one of the things that comes through in that guidance is that when you issue those, that onus is really on the grantee of the waiver, exception, or exemption to communicate that on to their trading partners downstream. And that's a place where I think industry is recognizing the significant challenge of that. Well, it's entirely understandable that they would carry that burden if they're granted the waiver, exception, or exemption. We as PDG are spending a lot of time trying to think through how we can support that notification or communication of those waivers, exceptions, and exemptions to trading partners so that that good product subject to it can continue to move through the supply chain. So the DSCSA applies to everyone from large multinational manufacturers down to small mom and pop pharmacies. And obviously, implementation and the challenge of implementation can look very different across those diverse organizations. How's FDA considering that diversity?
Well, DSCSA actually requires us to take a look at small businesses and specifically small dispensers. And this is described in the law as having 25 or fewer employees to be considered a small dispenser. And the law outlines how the agency needs to take a look at how small dispensers will be able to comply with the law, and requires us to do a small dispenser assessment. And this will include looking at the availability of the technology, the cost to implement certain systems and processes, in addition to any issues that may come up in terms of integration into current business processes or practices. And so the agency is working on conducting this assessment. We recently published a Federal Register notice that is seeking input from dispensers, but anybody can actually comment on it, on the content of that assessment or that study. And once we receive that, we'll be able to actually conduct the study. We'll then be able to share that information in a report publicly, and in addition to having a public meeting so that we can discuss the results of the study. After we complete those steps, the agency will have to consider all the information and determine whether a different timeline for compliance is needed for small dispensers, so for compliance with the enhanced supply chain security requirements that go into effect in November 2023.
Where can trading partners and other stakeholders learn more about what's required under the DSCSA?
So FDA's website has a lot of resources. We have a dedicated DSCSA webpage that has all the guidances and policy documents, and in addition to information for the public meetings that we have and the small dispenser assessment. So that's where you will find the information that's been published and go there for any updates as well.
There really is a tremendous amount of information available on the FDA website, as you said. Just a few other resources to point folks to. One is the PDG website, DSCSAGovernance.org. We have a number of resources and pieces of information from more of the industry perspective on how to achieve interoperability for 2023. That includes our PDG blueprint for DSCSA interoperability at DSCSAGovernance.org/blueprint. It includes both our blueprint as well as some other helpful resources, fact sheets, points of view documents, and similar materials. Specifically for dispensers, including pharmacies, there's a website of resources that's been set up, DSCSA.pharmacy, that includes a compilation of resources put together by a number of stakeholders to help pharmacies understand their compliance obligations in particular. And finally, encourage industry members to work closely with their trade associations who have been well plugged into the DSCSA implementation activities as well.
Right. I'll add to that advice is trading partners should continue to work together and also with their other business partners to implement DSCSA requirements. And stakeholder engagement is so important for the agency. So look for those opportunities to engage with the FDA. This will ensure that we have successful implementation of the DSCSA.
So right after we recorded that really helpful educational webinar, Connie, FDA put out some really important final guidance. It's kind of a flurry of them. And so we're so happy and grateful that you're willing to take the time to come back and talk a little bit more and share some insights on those with our audience.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
Yeah. So the first couple of guidances that I want to talk about were the compliance policies that FDA put out, one on the enhanced requirements and one on verification. Can you help our audience understand the impact of those compliance policies and explain the stabilization period that FDA established?
Sure. You know, this past year was such a critical year, and FDA looked for opportunities to hear directly from members of the supply chain. Those are trading partners and other stakeholders that play key roles in DSCSA implementation. And so whether it was an FDA public meeting or a docket where we received public comments and feedback, there were other opportunities like PDG workshops and other industry conferences that we were able to connect with the trading partners themselves and some of their business partners to really understand the progress and also the challenges. And so while we heard about great progress and we really are encouraged by that, everybody really needs to be proud about that we've done so much since 2013. There obviously were some implementation challenges, and recognizing that certain members of the supply chain maybe were at different levels of adoption and even capabilities, it made sense for us to issue these compliance policies. And the compliance policies, describe the agency's intention regarding enforcement of the requirements, particularly those that we refer to as those enhanced drug distribution security requirements in Section 582 G1 of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Those are the requirements that get us to enhance product tracing and enhance verification. And what these compliance policies do is they establish the stabilization period. And the importance of the stabilization period is from November 27, 2023 to November 27, 2024. This is the time when trading partners and other stakeholders really should not only continue to work towards getting those requirements in place, but also it allows time for them to troubleshoot and really work out any problems with their business partners, and mature their systems and processes so that we can have successful implementation of those enhanced drug distribution security requirements.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think industry's been grateful for it. And I love the way that you framed it as a stabilization period, right? I've heard people talk about you can't stabilize something you're not actively using and working on, right? You can't just sit back and wait. This is about actively using it. Your systems still need to be up and on and running. What FDA has done, I think, right, is just make sure that people have the flexibility to work through those challenges that you note without that risk of having to jeopardize patient access, because we all recognize how complex those systems and processes are and are going to be kind of during that year of stabilization. So I know PDG is grateful. I think everyone is grateful for that type of flexibility that FDA has afforded.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, one thing to point out, one thing that we always heard about is that it was challenging for the supply chain to sometimes test out some of these systems and processes. Well, now you're going to be able to do this with your operations, your day-to-day operations, and with real operational data. And I think that's going to help in that process of troubleshooting and validating different systems and processes. A couple other key points to note is, and their guidance has spelled this out as well, is the agency's expectations on the supply chain. We really strongly encourage every trading partner to continue their implementation, that these compliance policies should not be interpreted as any reason to stop what you're doing. You need to continue that progress. And as I mentioned before, we are very encouraged by that progress. So I just want to make sure that folks understand that, this is the stabilization period is there to help you, but to help you to continue to implement.
Yeah, I think that's a message we're all trying to get out, and I'm grateful that you're willing to help us try to get that out, Connie.
Right. In regards to the stabilization period, trading partners should use this time to continue to build and validate their interoperable systems and processes, and make sure that they're able to manage their products and also manage their data while they're continuing to be able to provide prescription drugs to patients. Also, we want to note that what this means is trading partners should use current methods to exchange and store their transactional documentation about the products and the ownership of those products. And also recognize that the compliance policies really only apply to those requirements, those enhanced drug distribution security requirements in Section 582. It doesn't apply to all the other DSCSA requirements that are currently in effect and that remain in effect even after November 27, 2023. So all those requirements related to lot level product tracing, but also verification, right? These are very important steps for dealing with suspect and illegitimate product.
In addition to those two compliance policies, FDA also finalized two really important substantive guidances, one on the enhanced requirements and one on standards for interoperability. Why are those so important for stakeholders to pay close attention to, Connie?
Right. Aside from the law requiring FDA to issue these guidances, we feel that these recommendations within both of these guidances are really important to assist implementing the enhanced drug distribution security requirements and to have robust supply chain security that's envisioned under DSCSA. So the first guidance is related to the enhanced drug distribution security requirements in Section 582G of the Act. And what this guidance does is it puts forth our recommendations for what system attributes are necessary to enable secure product tracing of product at the package level. And so it also describes what we view as enhanced product tracing in addition to enhanced verification. And that would include steps to use inference and aggregation if needed, but also there's just a lot of information in that guidance about those expectations of how to handle data and product in that enhanced securities space. The second guidance is related to standards for interoperable exchange of information related to tracing. And this really gets to the data exchange for your information that's within your transaction information, or TI, as we've some usually refer to it, and also your transaction statement, or TS. And even though we have many guidances that help to support product tracing and verification, these two, like I've mentioned, we think were critical for where we are at. And the standards guidance itself specifically highlights and recommends GS1's EPCIS standard. As we worked through this process and we were hearing from stakeholders in the supply chain, it seemed like this standard seemed to be the optimal standard for drug traceability at this time.
Yeah, as you say, EPCIS really is the backbone of interoperability. And so I know PDG and many others were really grateful to see FDA point to that so explicitly as kind of the preferred option. Ultimately, probably not the only way anyone will do it, but as a preferred option. So we were grateful for that.